Next up, so we have the, Dr. Larson did the CMS kind of ECQM viewpoint, and now we'll transition over to the NCQA and HEDIS world. And we've been so fortunate to have a great relationship with NCQA, and Ben Hamlin from NCQA is presented here before. You may remember him from last year, and we've worked with him and presented at each other's events and so on, and they've been very forward-thinking and working with us on the HIE data flow and the PPQC, Physician Payer Quality Collaborative flow of getting supplemental clinical data over to the payers and having HEDIS auditors involved in approving that whole process. And you know, Sam and Ben are part of a team at NCQA that are very looking forward to and running all kinds of really interesting pilots that you'll hear all about. So I'll just introduce Sam here. So Sam is a senior healthcare analyst in performance measurement at the National Committee for Quality Assurance, NCQA. Prior to working at NCQA, Sam worked on federal regulatory issues related to coding and reimbursement and health IT for the American College of Physicians, including serving as a liaison to the American Medical Association's Relative Value Update Committee. Mr. Benton's interests are particularly focused on the development of computable representations of quality measures using common information and technology standards. His work has included the development and reevaluation of new and existing healthcare quality measures used in the Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set, or HEDIS. HEDIS is a tool used by more than 90% of America's health plans to measure performance on important dimensions of care and service. Sam is a graduate of Texas A&M and is currently pursuing his Executive Master's in Health Systems Administration at Georgetown. So please help me welcoming Sam.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bo and Myhan, for inviting me to speak here. This is my first time here. It's been really great. I got here on Wednesday, so I've been able to see most of the conference and really got a lot of great new ideas to bring back to my colleagues at NCQA, and I think the work that's going on here is very far ahead of what I've seen like in a lot of other states throughout the country, so it's really great. Like Bo said, Ben couldn't be here, unfortunately. He decided to go to Africa for 6 weeks and leave me with a lot of work to do. But this is one of the good things that came out of this, because I got to come here and attend this conference and give this speech in his place. So as Bo said, I'm a senior healthcare analyst in performance measurement at NCQA. I was going to go over my background, but he did that, so I'll just skip ahead to what I'll be speaking about today. So I'm first going to touch on our recent efforts to create digital measure specifications using the same standards that are used in ECQMs for some of our more new or more recent HEDIS measures that utilize multiple sources of electronic data for reporting. I'm also going to talk about our process for prioritizing and selecting new measures or existing measures in the future for creating digital measure specifications or for allowing more data in those measures than what's traditionally allowable, as well as our efforts to create flexible measures that can really be used at different levels of attribution across the healthcare system or within different programs. It's something that we're proactively exploring right now at NCQA. So I know most of you are probably familiar with HEDIS, but for those of you who aren't, I just want to give a quick brief background of what it is, so please bear with me. So HEDIS stands for the Healthcare Effectiveness Data Information Set. It's a set of measures, about 94 measures, I believe, across 7 domains of care, developed and maintained by NCQA and used in a variety of public reporting programs, including Medicare Advantage Stars Rating Program and a number of state and local programs, such as like California P4P program. The measures are used to calculate performance results, and by NCQA they're used to produce ratings and comparison amongst plans, primarily intended for individual consumers looking for a plan in the marketplace or employers looking to buy a plan for their employees. So as I mentioned previously, we've created digital measure specifications for 6 HEDIS measures that we'll be offering as part of the HEDIS 2019 measure set this year, which will be available this July 2018, so just a few weeks. So because HEDIS measures are reported at the health plan level, they have traditionally been dependent on administrative claims data, as I'm sure most of you know, or manual record review of sampling patients, which is a very time-intensive process. So recognizing the move in the industry towards interoperability and by CMS with all the work around ECQMs, and towards more technology-enabled processes and products and services, led us to go down this road of exploring, and now creating and offering these digital measure specifications, which are similar to what you would find in an ECQM measure package. Our hope is that by offering these digital measure specifications as a supplement to some of these 6 measures, and then hopefully more in the future, it will provide kind of a blueprint or a roadmap for calculating HEDIS performance results, and that we hope it'll lead to better alignment. Our goals are really that better alignment across existing federal, state, and commercial programs, more flexible measures that can be adapted for use across different levels of attribution without losing the integrity of the measure or a NCQA use license, so they could still be possibly reported back to NCQA. And also to introduce a new distribution methodology for HEDIS measures that better aligns with plans, workflows, and when they need the measures, and gives them more time to look at their data and address any gaps in care before reporting at the end of the year. So included in the HEDIS 2019 measure set will be digital measures specifications for the 6 measures listed here. Starting in July with a purchase of what's called the HEDIS Volume 2 Technical Specifications, will also be a downloadable zip file containing the digital file formats for these 6 measures. The formats are all listed in the slide graphic, and they're very similar to what you would find if you downloaded an ECQM measure package. It will contain a human readable file, which is a narrative description of the measure, making it easily understandable by someone who's not familiar with the computer encoded measures. And that also contains the logic and value sets that are formatted in a very easily understandable way. So there's under headers for eligible population, numerator, denominator, et cetera, and you can match it up with the narrative description on top. So it gives you a better way to start understanding the logic and how the measure is expressed. It also contains a number of machine-friendly files that I know less about. An XML file, a JSON file that are representations of the measure, as well as an HQMF file that's in XML. So I want to iterate that it's not required to use these digital measure specifications to report these measures. They're more as a blueprint to help plans and data vendors that are already using measure reporting software to calculate measure results. It'll give them a more standard way of building these into their systems. So currently, we are creating these measure specifications using CMS's measure authoring tool. And as you know, this tool is intended for mainly provider-level ECQM measures. So there's some differences in the things that we have to do to manipulate the files a little bit on the back end, or we have been working with the contractors with CMS who developed this tool to implement some of the abilities that would make these measures able to be reported at the health plan level, such as attribution, things around like continuous enrollment, other things that have to do with health plan level reporting, as well as referencing NCQA's value sets instead of the VSAC like an ECQM would. So we also adhere to common information exchange standards such as CQL, QDM, FHIR, as well as clinical standard clinical terminology vocabulary sets. So using these common health information standards allows us to create measures that more precisely reflect the delivery of care. For example, this slide shows how a positive depression screening can be more precisely identified through the use of CQL and QDM. As you can see in the 2018 measure, a positive depression screening result for an individual patient was reported through the use of a generic HCPCS code, and that's all you needed to indicate that that individual was screened positive for depression symptoms. In the 2019 measure, each individual screening tool will have an associated LOINC code for that tool, and when reported, the LOINC code can carry a result with it. So the CQL is actually able to, we're able to express it so it can look for that result, indicating positive or negative screen. This isn't a great example because the PHQ and the PHQ-9 and the PHQ-9 modified tool both use a score of 5 to indicate positive depression, but there are other tools in this measure that have various scores such as 10, 28, et cetera, that would indicate positive screening. So we're able to express the measure in the way that can look for those specific tool results and what the corresponding numeric value should be. Additionally, we can see changes in scores over time and assess whether there's another one of our measures looks for this and assesses whether there's a remission in depression symptoms over time and by what percentage. So NCQA has developed these new measures, the 6 measures that I covered previously that allow more the use of data from more electronic data sources outside of the traditional administrative claims data. For now, we refer to these measures as electronic clinical data systems measures, or ECDS. And I know if you were here last year, Ben talked, I think, at length about these measures. So the digital measure specifications, as I said before, are really meant to aid. The ECDS measures are built in a way that fits well with a digital measure specification, and they're really meant to aid in the calculation of a result for that measure. So by allowing more electronic data for HEDIS measure reporting, we're hoping to encourage broader exchange of data between payers and point of service systems, providers, health information exchanges, et cetera, and building those relationships. As Kevin was saying before in the hospital program, if you put a lot of investment up front, it can pay off. The cost will be lessened over time, and it pays off to do that. So we're hoping that this will encourage it, the more and more measures that we're releasing with these digital specifications and that allow for this other data. We're also hoping that it will improve the timeliness of calculating rates and making them more actionable. If they get plans get the specifications early and they're able to implement them easily and able to implement changes easily, then they will be able to see results in real time and be able to address any challenges before they have to report their results at the end of the year. Also, we're hoping that it'll reduce burden by providing a more standardized roadmap for capturing electronic data and reporting it. So this slide shows a very high-level summary of ECDS guidelines and reporting requirements. The measure specifications that are built on top of these measures utilize value sets that are made up of standardized vocabulary terminologies. Along with reporting results, plans identify the category that they found the data in. It can really come from data outside of these categories, but this is how you would report it to NCQA for now, such as EHR, case management systems, or administrative claims database. And the types of data that we accept currently are categorized as structured, unstructured, or member reported. So in order to give plans more time to catch up to these changes because they're very different than a lot of the other measures in the HEDIS set and obviously the way we've been doing things in the past. The measures have been and still are optional for reporting for HEDIS 2019, and the results will not be publicly reported, although we have had a number of plans to report the measures, ECDS measures that have been in the previous years of HEDIS. So I apologize, I know this slide has a lot going on, but I kind of wanted to give a basic example of how a plan could access data from different systems and use it for reporting different data elements in the measure. So the tables to the left show two rates that are reported on in the depression screening measure. Rate 1 for the measure is the percentage of members aged 12 and older who had a depression screening during the measurement year or measurement period. So in this example, the plan identified the patient's age using their enrollment database and confirmed a depression screening was performed using a CPT code from their administrative claims database. Similarly, rate 2 is calculated using SNOMED and LOINC codes sent to the plan from a case management system and a provider's EHR. We've seen some plans in testing been able to demonstrate this effectively, receiving data from point-of-service systems or external reference systems, such as local or regional health information exchange network. Our hope is that these measures will encourage plans to establish better data relationships across the healthcare system and wherever their members seek care. So now I would like to provide a brief overview of NCQA's strategic directions that we're considering for future measurement work. Some of this work is already ongoing, but a lot of it is still in the initial exploratory phase. So currently we're going through our list of 90-plus HEDIS measures and identifying which would be suitable to create digital measure specifications for, or expanding them to allow more clinical electronic data. Our process involves categorizing measures into those that are fixed or not suitable for anything outside of claims data, as they are currently specified, and just leaving them alone or deciding to retire them. Measures that are expandable, they're suitable to allow other data sources, but in doing so wouldn't change the scientific acceptability of the measure, so it wouldn't require an overhaul of the measure, or reevaluation, or further testing. And measures that would require that, or creating new measures to address critical gaps in care that couldn't traditionally be addressed by administrative claims data, or the manual record review was too burdensome to create a measure around that aspect of care. So we're choosing to incorporate multiple data sources into measures when it's feasible. Plans tell us that it's feasible to do so, that we learned through testing, when it would ease the burden of reporting, such as measures that currently rely on manual record review, and switching to electronic data sources to count for those areas of care would really ease the burden for them, so they don't have to hire a team of data abstractors. And when we specify them in a way that will promote alignment with other programs and levels of accountability. So after selecting the measures, we express them in CQL and QDM, which can be transformed into the various machine-friendly formats, and then use these outputs to test the measures against fake patient databases to ensure the measures are specified correctly. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was an interactive slide. So this is the fixed, expandable, multiple data sources measures that I was discussing earlier that we're categorizing our measures into. And this is a simplified version of our process for constructing the digital specification, where we express the measure in CQL, we get the machine-readable outputs, and then test them against the fake patient databases. So we're also exploring updating our current process of how we currently distribute our HEDIS measures. Let me click through this. Sorry, I think this is a bent slide. So currently we offer the measures in a PDF the measure specifications, or you can get a hard copy, and our value sets in an Excel sheet that are downloadable through the NCQA store. And this requires plans who use data vendors to take the narrative specifications, interpret what they mean, and hard code them into their systems. And it's very time intensive and it's prone to errors. So in future processes, we hope to have something more similar to a subscription model, where you would subscribe to HEDIS measures or a set of HEDIS measures that are applicable to you or the program that you're using them in. And we'd be able to push out automated updates at certain periods in time as needed, which would automatically update health plan or data vendor systems and produce measure results in real time so they can track them ahead of reporting season. So although the measures are primarily intended for reporting at the health plan level, we recognize that they're often adapted and used in different settings. So another consideration is to better align HEDIS measures across different levels of accountability, such as provider, practice, network, and health plan. We're exploring what it would entail for HEDIS measures to be broken down into component pieces that will allow for multiple attribution models without breaching the NCQA use license. And finally, this is kind of a more hypothetical situation, but something that we're discussing about what it would entail and possibly look like in the future if this were to be a capability. So this slide illustrates a HEDIS measure adapted for use at the provider level, where the provider generates a QRDA, and only the data that's applicable to that measure would be sent to the health plan. So the health plan isn't necessarily building a connection with maybe the provider's EHR that's where they can go in and look at any data they want. It's only the data required to report on that measure. The health plan would be able to consume the QRDA and create their own QRDAs or other formats of reporting for various NCQA reporting requirements, CMS reporting programs, internal quality improvement activities, or any other quality programs that they may be a part of. So lastly, I wanted to highlight NCQA's Digital Quality Summit. We'd held this last November in Washington, D.C., and are doing it again this November. And it's really a great chance to learn more about what I covered today and go more in depth. Last year we had a lot of subject matter experts, in this area give talks on what they have done and considerations for the future. As well as we had breakout sessions with work groups and kind of a mini hackathon where people were able to download these digital measure specifications we made available and run them against fake patient databases and sit there and address problems with each other in real time. So it's a really great place to learn more about all that activity that's going on, especially with NCQA and ECQMs and other quality reporting. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I hope to be back next year, either as a speaker or an attendee. And I'd like to open it up to any questions you may have.
Hi, Tom Summer from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. And I have a question related to one of your recent slides pertaining to the QRDA unique to the measure being sent out from the provider office. And I wanted to make sure that the design is compatible with how we operate within the state, which is all of the QRDA information being sent before they reaches any health plan to the HIE hub, and then matched to health plan membership, because it's very important to us not to create a process that is health plan specific in terms of the flow of information directly from the practice. So I was wondering if you could comment on whether or not this design is flexible enough to accommodate to the sort of process flow as it exists in our state.
Yeah. So we haven't really gotten much past this graphic. It's a very hypothetical at this point that we're just talking about. We do, for our PCMH program and other provider level programs, we accept QRDAs. We don't yet for our HEDIS health plan reporting. It's still the traditional IDSS reporting system. I think that obviously while we're exploring this, that's something we would look into and issues we would consider. I'm by no means an expert in this field, but there are other people at NCQA who are and probably would be able to expand on this more. I do know that we are working with CQL developers and HL7, as well as people who develop the measure authoring tool, to build the capability for, in those digital measure specifications I spoke of, to identify payer type and benefits and continuous enrollment. So that's something, if the capability is able to be created one day, that may help alleviate the problem for those, I guess, who aren't near a health information exchange or aren't able to access one, or theirs doesn't have member enrollment data. So that's something that we are actively working on, and hopefully will be in the measure specifications for the October update.
Thank you. Terrific. And one thing I didn't hear you mention, which I think is exciting, is NCQA is built and now granted the authority to be a certification testing tool for electronic quality measure health IT data. And I wonder if you can tell people a little bit about that and comment about it, that before the only kind of tool around was one the government built, but now there's a trusted third party in NCQA that can test EHRs for ECQMs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're referring to our eMeasure certification program, which should probably be updated to ECQM. But yeah, so we were deemed ONC certified a few months ago. So we've always been certifying ECQMs for reporting to NCQA, but now we're able to certify for CMS's programs as well. So obviously when building these measures using the same standards for HEDIS health plan level reporting, we are actively working on rejiggering that process for certification at the health plan level as well. So hopefully if we build the measures to allow flexibility for just little things like attribution to be tweaked, or maybe adding a visit or moving a visit, depending if you're using the measure at the provider level or the health plan level, you would be able to certify just based on one specification. But that's something that I know we're still working on, and other people at NCQA have a lot more information on that if you're interested. I can follow up with you.
Thank you. Good morning, Dara Barrera with the Michigan State Medical Society. And this morning we've heard a lot from, excuse me, both speakers about alignment, and I love hearing that, and simplification, and I love hearing that. Could you maybe talk about auditor alignment? You know, I think that there is a ton of great work going into how we're moving the data, and not necessarily how we're working to align how payers are audited. And so then that unfortunately changes the work that each physician practice, physician organization, health system, how they have to work on their end. And I think that in order to come to true alignment, that every organization has to be able to say, this is how we do it, and they know what the outcome on the other end is going to be as far as auditing for supplemental data and, you know, source codes and what's acceptable, what's not, because that is very different between each payer and their auditor. And I think that that is kind of on the opposite spectrum, but also equally as important as where the data is coming from, how it's moving, but then also how it's audited and accepted or rejected on that end. Mm-hmm. Is that something you can touch on?
Yeah, just to clarify, do you mean like audited between HEDIS auditors or between different programs?
HEDIS auditors. So, you know, specifically we have a lot of talk around supplemental data and what
And you're saying there's a difference between how different HEDIS auditors address that? Okay. So that's something that is obviously a problem, yes. I've attended the auditor conference only once, and it was a little scary experience. That's obviously something that our internal auditing department needs to do a better job of clarifying and communicating to the auditors. I know that moving towards these ECDS measures will do away with all the different guidelines around supplemental data. It's really infuriating, even as a developing measures, because the reporting requirements and guidelines are different for each measure that uses supplemental data. Even if they both use pharmacy data, there's always different rules for each one. And I know there's usually science-based reasons for that, but moving towards these ECDS measures will standardize the guidelines for reporting all types of data. So I think that's one of the goals of transitioning all our measures towards ECDS measures, getting rid of supplemental data, although you could think of it as multiple sources of electronic data, but there will be guidelines that apply across all measures for reporting that type of data. So I know Ben is pushing really hard for NCQA to move towards converting more and more of our measures into ECDS and standardizing them, and that's something that I know our board is very supportive, and we're investing a lot of resources in exploring the area and seeing what it would take to convert a lot of measures in our HEDIS measure set.
Not everyone, or not every payer in the state receives the same auditor from CMS. And so when these auditors come down and say, hey, Blue Cross Blue Shield, this is standard supplemental data, and this is non-standard supplemental data, a different auditor might go to Meridian or Priority Health and say, hey, this is standard supplemental data, and this is non-standard supplemental data. I think anybody who's been in this space for, I don't know, the last 5-6 years, that's really taken flight in Michigan, they're probably as puzzled as I am when they can just readily send data straight to Priority Health over an interface and never be audited for it. Yet when we send data to Blue Cross Blue Shield requires that we meet this whole boat of requirements and then go through an actual audit process that's incredibly resource intensive, requires a lot of practice engagement, tons of follow-up. And when we try and solve these problems at the state level, we were in a meeting a couple weeks ago, we challenged all the payers to say, hey, what can we do so you know that the data you're receiving can be used in all of your HEDIS engines and scorecards, et cetera? And they couldn't answer our question because they're like, we don't know who the heck our auditor is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that those are common issues that I've heard raised a lot, and like I said previously, I think this is moving our measures towards this standard is a way to address those issues, hopefully. So, for instance, if you don't have data that's in a discrete field and linked to a like standardized terminology in the value sets. There are semi-structured member-reported data guidelines around that that are very, very specific, and it's easy to see what counts and what doesn't count and what you need to have with that data in order for it to count. to be counted in the ECDS measures. But you're right, it's the guidelines around the supplemental data are very fuzzy.
Just, I think people are aware that if your health plan is audited and your data incorrectness exceeds 1.5%, the whole data set's thrown out. So it's almost like a capital offense if you have bad supplemental data, and so everybody is super rigorous about it and paranoid, and perhaps that adds into amplifying any variation that's seen among the auditors, because you simply don't know in advance what you're going to be facing, and so you assume the worst, and the next thing you know, people at the health plan may be carrying it to a level that NCQA never even dreamed of, out of the paranoia that their entire data set will be tossed.
I think it goes back to that validation framework we were talking about earlier too. If we just follow the code sets for NCQA and we look at LOINC and everything else, and we just plug those into our data warehouse and we're like, match on that, send that data, we'll fail every measure under the sun, because we'll get that 700-inch tall person or the 1,200-pound test patient or something like that. I think it goes back to that validation framework, and our physician organizations or their vendors are bearing that validation framework to try and make like an NCQA HEDIS code set work. The code set's great, and it helps us improve a lot of configurations for EMR systems that are poorly implemented. However, we're still forced to look at that data like with great detail every time we add a new EMR set of practices. So just something to consider, that maybe a code set's great, but maybe if I know there's like in our APS format we have in the state, there's guidelines on blood pressure ranges and things like that. And those additional pieces that you can provide somebody to build in their validation framework makes a huge, huge difference in the quality of data you're going to get on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the formats we're using now are required these value sets to be created, but we do have guidelines around mapping to the value sets, although I know it's very time and labor intensive. But yeah, I think moving towards this new standard, there are things like I talked about earlier where you can just look for a result of a screening code, or you could look for a result of blood pressure, or weight, or BMI percentage change, things like that. So, as well as, there's things we've talked about like natural language processing, how that would fit into measures, things like that. So, obviously, any technology that's better ways we can do it, we're definitely open to suggestions and exploring those routes. Our leadership team and board are very interested in innovation and willing to spend money on it. So it's a good thing, I think, for the organization, but it'll mean, I think, a lot of changes going forward. Any more questions or comments?
I'll just give a shout to the Quality Summit that was put up there. EJEF and I, EJEF, you can wave in the middle there. We attended last year, and it was great. They had a lot of diverse stakeholders, and NCQA is not in an ivory tower by themselves thinking about this stuff. They really wanted engagement, and I think it's going to be great this year as well. And Myhin has been invited to that to lead a little work group, and we would love to bring some Michigan POs or payers along with us and bring your voice to the table and talk directly to the source. And all of NCQA's C-suite leadership was there, interacting with everyone. So I think it was a great experience, and I would encourage you guys to look into this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I didn't mention earlier too, we also have a digital measures collaborative that Myhin has participated in and presented to many times. That's kind of a quarterly, we meet about 4 times a year. This is the second year, and it's to address all these issues. It's health plans, data vendors, subject matter experts. They give input on our digital specifications, our direction, and we've done some testing with them. So it's a large group. They're very vocal. They have a lot of opinions and offer a lot of feedback. So if anyone is interested in being on that list, please let me know. All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This was a great opportunity. Hope to come back next year. Thanks.